Hello, welcome to The Revealing. I'm your host, Pavarotti, here to discuss Idaho 4. As a disclaimer, this channel's for entertainment purposes. These are my opinions, not here to slander anyone. So why don't we just get started with it today? You know, it's interesting. Sometimes information, you'll find it in strange places for strange reasons. In fact, sometimes negative events, negative people, negative aspects lead you down a trail to positive outcomes. And for those of you that have been watching my videos for the duration that I've been doing them, you'll know that I've always tried to be fair. I've always tried to be fair to Mr. Kohberger, whether he's guilty or innocent. And if I see things that point towards his innocence, I point them out. If I see things that point towards his guilt, I point them out. So that's just what I do, is I point things out that I see. So as I'm going through this investigation, and my last video that I did, I believe I opened a lot of your eyes to the timeline and the true investigation. If you haven't watched that video before you watch this one, I implore you to go back and watch it. And I want you to go back and watch it with an open mind. Because if you can watch that video with an open mind, then you can grasp the concepts that I'm about to discuss in this video. And for those of you that think I am a guilter? Well, I think in this video, you can open your minds to that one as well. I'm neither a guilter nor a pro-burger, nor a double cheeseburger. All right, I'm just here to point things out as I see them. Now, as I went through the timeline explaining the events of the investigation, pointed out the search warrants, one thing that was clear, there was absolutely nothing from an investigative standpoint that happened between December 15th and December 23rd that would have put Mr. Kohberger on the law enforcement's investigative radar. So, I have my theory on what happened between December 15th and December 23rd, but the investigation's theory that never made it into the actual PCA, because they knew that the evidence from that investigation would never make it into court. So they didn't want to use it as a reason to arrest him if they weren't going to be able to present it in court. And that was the IGG investigation. And that's the investigative genetic genealogy. And that's why the court proceedings over the IGG has been so contentious, wanting to keep that quiet. What the investigation is going to want to point to, which they can't in court, but they can in the court of public opinion, is that the way they got to Mr. Kohberger was taking his touch DNA, doing an investigative genetic genealogy investigation that led to Mr. Kohberger's father. And that's what put him on the radar on December 23rd, where they started filing search warrants to get reports of information from Mr. Kohberger's phone. And remember, this is an important point that I made in the last video, was on December 23rd when they were issuing the search warrant for that cast report. Remember what they were actually looking for. They weren't looking for all of the 6 months prior to the night of the atrocity and his movements and whereabouts. No, the search warrant they issued for a cast on December 23rd was for November 12th through November 13th, hours prior to the event and hours after the event. So that means the warrant that requested the information about all of his whereabouts prior to the date of the atrocity, that came much later. And that's something that I really didn't touch on in my last video. However, perhaps I'm wrong. I've never been one to say I'm right when I'm wrong. And in fact, I'm pretty sure that I said 22,000 Elantras in the last video, and I don't have the number in front of me right now. I don't think it was 22,000 Elantras. I think it was 2,200. I can't verify that number either. I know it was a lot. I just don't have it right in front of me. So, you know what? If I make a mistake and misspeak, I'm going to correct it. But whenever I'm doing this, and I don't want to ramble on because I mentioned that there were other content creators out there that I wasn't aware of that had a low opinion of me, and I found that out by listening to the Thought Right podcast the other evening. So I went to their channel and investigated some of their work, found out their opinion of me was low, which is fine. I've already mentioned that. But it's interesting because I did look at some of the work that he's done, and he did a video about 2 weeks ago, and I happened to just view that, and you know, I always pay attention to dates. That's my thing. Whenever you're looking at an investigation, the dates that something happened mattered. And I seen some dates on there, and although he was trying to explain it in a way that, you know, made sense to him, he obviously just doesn't have a lot of business administration experience. I mean, either never worked in accounting, or he's never owned his own business and dealt with the financial burdens of owning your own business. So, but it's interesting. Now, what I want to do in this video is I want to show you that if Mr. Kohberger was potentially framed in this investigation, I'll show you where it happened. Show you exactly where it happened, and I'll show you how it happened. Because as I go through this, if there's a possibility of his innocence, I said I will point it out. I have my other theory. So whenever you're basing your decision on whether you feel like Mr. Kohberger is innocent or guilty, heck, do it on the right information, folks. Don't do it on feelings. Don't do it on, you know, ridiculousness. Do it on the facts. So I'm going to give you some facts, and then going forward, you can decide for yourself. So here's the facts. Taking that exact same timeline that I just covered with you in my last video, and as you go through before December 23rd, December 15th to December 23rd, something happened that put Kohberger on the radar. The law enforcement is going to suggest what happened was they got the results back of the genetic genealogy test. And that's what put him on the radar, and that started that whole scenario in play, December 23rd, everything that we talked about. My feelings or something else happened between then, and I'm not going to touch on that in this video. But let's look at the law enforcement claim on this. Now, I did a video a while back. In fact, it was I think it was 3 months ago. And it was one of my least viewed videos. In fact, and y'all that think I am a guilter obviously haven't watched the videos that I did to, you know, to help you not form that opinion of me. And this particular video was one of them. And I titled it Impossible IGG. I think it's got the lowest views of any other video I've ever done. So a lot of y'all out there did not see that. But in that video, I used a company as an example of how the IGG investigation could not be completed in the amount of time that law enforcement says it was. And the company that I used as the example was a company called Othram. Now, you talk about dumb luck, because at that point in time, nobody knew Othram was the actual company that did the investigative genealogy investigation on Mr. Kohberger. I was using it as an example. About 3-4 weeks later, all of a sudden the Othram info comes out, and I see all the content creators going after Othram. And I went, wow, that must have been a lucky stab. Nobody even watched that video. So what I'm going to do is, I'm not going to show you that whole video. It's very short. But I want you to understand the investigative genealogy aspect of this. And then I'm going to point out, using the exact same timeline that I just went through and that other content creator's finding, to show how they could have set up Mr. Kohberger. So sit back and check this out. Start going at this thing at a different direction now. I'm not saying that anyone's guilty or innocent, but I do want to attack the law enforcement measures that they've taken in this case. And the more that I've learned about the IGG information, the more questions come to mind. And I'm going to show you some cutouts of a video I watched recently on the IGG information in a different case and how it can apply to this one. Now, my entire premise is the Drug Task Force provided the names of Mr. Kohberger from the beginning, and that still may be the case, because as you learn how the IGG information works, things start to fall apart really quickly if they're not actually pointing the IGG team in a specific direction. The time frame from the date this atrocity happened to the date that they arrested Mr. Kohberger is just frankly too short. The IGG teams typically take 6 weeks to generate the initial profile to be able to start an IGG investigation. And the reason for that is law enforcement genetic genealogy profiles, or just DNA profiles they use to match up potential assailants, uses 10 markers. It turns out the IGG genetic genealogy markers does not work on a 10 marker system. They need hundreds, if not thousands, of markers to be able to adequately search for an individual through genetic genealogy. And because of the additional markers that's needed, it takes a lot more time to generate that initial profile. So if it takes them 6 weeks to generate the initial IGG profile to start an investigation, how was Mr. Kohberger apprehended based on that in less than 6 weeks? I mean, from start to finish. The only way that could be possible is if they were steered in a certain direction from the beginning. If the IGG investigative team was given somebody's name and told to work in reverse with an IGG investigation, then that time frame may be possible. Now, folks, this is not legal. We don't want law enforcement to be able to investigate in this manner. And this might be why some of the secrecy around this case, especially the IGG information, is very important for law enforcement to keep under wraps. Now, I've got a couple of videos here that I'd like for you to watch on the IGG process.
I'm David Middleman, CEO of Othram.
I'm Kristen Middleman. I'm the Chief Business Development Officer at Othram.
DNA is pretty much all we've ever done. My wife is a biochemist by training, a little bit different than the genetics background I have. Othram's a company that supports law enforcement investigations. Basically, we focus on human identification from crime scenes.
Is there anything else you know about strategizing business-wise? I thought we should take some more notorious cases.
This case was really unique in that there was a lot of attention drawn to the case. There was an online Facebook group with thousands of folks that were working on it.
Do you know what evidence they have?
The skeletal remains. Does it look awesome? Can you see the little DNA thing on my hat? It's very important to me. If you just wanted to look at a bunch of DNA, it looks a lot like this. And these are basically the positions along what's called the human reference sequence. You can cluster them using principal component analysis and figure out...
Wait, go back. Can you say that in like your dumbest way possible?
Alright, sure. There's billion positions that describe your DNA.
Traditional forensic testing right now that the police use to identify people looks at 10 markers in someone's DNA. The sequencing that we do here at Othram looks at tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of markers.
The technology that Othram is using is new. The ideas are new. They look for similarities between the DNA you have stored and the person you found, and you can say, oh, this DNA is pretty close to people from this region. It's pretty close to this family. So you don't get a precise match. You get
one of the charts you just seen was a chart that showed family members during the process of an IGG investigation, nieces, nephews, mothers, grandmothers, grandfathers. Well, after further research into this method, I've learned that what can really throw off an IGG investigation is things that you wouldn't typically want to find in an IGG investigation, such as a spouse having an affair with somebody and having children outside of that affair. You know, the other spouse may have never even known that happened. And when they get into a serious IGG investigation, they uncover things like this. And when they uncover things like this, it throws their investigation sideways because it changes the genetic genealogy in the line. Now that makes me think back to the recent documents that was just released on confidentiality. If you remember, if you've looked into those documents, the court has ruled that the defense may show additional information to their investigative team that prior to that did not have that information available to them. But there's a specific order in there, and it specifically prohibits the defense's investigation team from interviewing family members as related to the IGG investigation without prior court approval. Now, when I seen that originally, I thought, why would they not want them to talk to the family members in the IGG investigation? I mean, these are Kohberger's family members. Why wouldn't they want the defense to talk to them? I mean, why wouldn't the defense want to talk to them? I mean, it doesn't make any sense for them to specify that. Oh, but it does now. Because if there was some discrepancies in the genealogy link to Mr. Kohberger's father in that IGG investigation, like for instance, an affair that led to a split in the genealogy lines, well, then they certainly wouldn't want the defense to go and interview those family members and destroy their very fast IGG investigation that led to Mr. Kohberger's father, because we know without that investigation, well, then they would have never got to Kohberger. And on my next video, I'm going to go down a different rabbit hole with Mr. Kohberger and that knife sheath and that touch DNA and destroy that as well. But let me know how you feel. Let me hear your comments, your criticisms. Like and subscribe to the channel. I'm going to be bringing you more information because this is starting to get interesting. Pavarotti out. Okay, so the time frame that the investigation was completed in for genetic genealogy it's impossible. And if that's the case, then how did they get to Kohberger using that investigation? Well, there's only one way they could do it, and I've mentioned this in the past, and that is a reverse investigation. Now, if they knew the destination, just look at it like this. If that company knew where to start, they had a name, and they knew where to finish, and they had a sample, then all they've got to do is plug in the start and the finish line, and then very quickly fill in the gap so that they could show a completed investigation. That would not be difficult for them to do at that time if they had the start and the finish line. So they had a sample from the perpetrator and they knew who the perpetrator was. They could complete that investigative genealogy, that IGG investigation in the time frame that law enforcement says it did. But that's the only way. Now, it has been said, though, that touch DNA on the knife sheath didn't provide enough samples enough DNA for the lab to create a genetic genealogy profile, a typical profile that they create, which is only 10 markers, run it through CODIS, which is the national database. It didn't get a hit. There wouldn't have been enough of that sample left for them to send off to Othram and create an entirely new sample with the type of information they need, because their genetic genealogy markers are tens to hundreds of thousands, not 10. So they actually need a little bit more of a sample to be able to come up with all those additional markers. So that would be the question. Where did they get the additional DNA to be able to send off to Othram? And that's where the fishiness in this thing comes into play. Now, this is an invoice that other content creator found. Pretty good find. And it is the invoice from the investigation team to the company Othram. And take a look at it for just a minute. Okay, now in that invoice, he was pointing out the date the invoice was issued, which was November 29th, and the date the invoice was due, which was December 29th. And for some reason, he had in his mind that if they sent the information to him on November 20th and they billed it on the 29th, then that means they completed the investigation in 9 days, and that's crazy. And he went to a long rant. But here's the thing. For those of you out there who have a job in business administration, accounting, or if you own your own business, then you'll know how the back office of the business is run. Okay, there's something that every business has, and it's called an ARAP. Okay, and that's the person who's in charge of paying the bills for the business is in control of the ARAP. All right, and unless you've actually been in that position, then you don't realize how difficult of a position it is to actually work that position, because especially if you own the company, you have three things you look at each month. You have your cash on hand. Okay, you'll have your cash on hand accounting. Then you have your ARAP. And your AR is your accounts receivable. That's money that people owe the business that you expect them to pay, and you know when it's coming in. Then you have your AP, which is your accounts payable. That's all the bills that you owe. So if you don't have enough cash on hand to pay your AP, you've got to look at your AR, expect the money to come in at the right time so you know when you're going to be able to pay everything on your AP. Anybody that's actually run a business or is familiar with accounting will understand that. Unfortunately, this gentleman has never been in that position, so he was having trouble with it. But on that invoice that I just showed you to Othram, real clear, date issued invoice November 29th, date due December 29th. Okay, so anybody that's ever run the position I was just speaking of knows that you run your bills on what's called a 30-day rolling. Okay, that means your bills are issued on a 30-day rolling and your bills are paid on a 30-day rolling. And I won't get into much more of that. That's just side talk. But the date issued on the invoice clearly is the date that they were contracted. December 29th. That's the date. Law enforcement and the investigation contracted Othram to perform that genetic genealogy test. December 29th, that was the date that they arrested Mr. Kohberger. Well, that's also the date that they expected their invoice to be paid, 30 days. But what happened on December 29th in the investigation? We covered that in the last video. Did you go watch it? Remember on December 29th, those officers over at Washington State University located a white Elantra that they identified as belonging to Mr. Bryan Kohberger. Now remember, that Elantra at the time didn't have the front license plate, so it's my contention that they put it to the side at that point. However, if I am wrong, Well, Pavarotti isn't wrong very often, but he is sometimes. But if I am wrong, and that did put that gentleman on the radar that date, and that's the date they physically found the vehicle, and that's the date they hired Othram to start the IGG investigation. Wonder where they got that touch DNA. If they had already run out of it, then heck, and they just needed a little bit more, they could have just pulled it right off that door handle, couldn't they? Something to consider, because something happened between December 15th and December 23rd to put Mr. Kohberger on that radar. And if that something that happened was like the law enforcement stated, it was they got the results back of the IGG investigation that's pointed to Mr. Kohberger. Well, that's a fast IGG investigation from November 29th to December 23rd. If you watch that video I just showed you, I don't think that's possible. Maybe that's the time frame they needed to complete the reverse genetic genealogy investigation, and they held off running those warrants for Mr. Kohberger until that company verified they had completed it for them so that everything would match up in the PCA and in the future court hearings. Just something to consider. Anyways, please like and subscribe to the channel. Post your comments, post your criticisms, post your thoughts. You know, I enjoy reading those. Been reading them all weekend. Very interesting. And I'm just going to leave it at that. So thank you for watching. And once again, Pavarotti is out.